should say
Yes.
done. Excellent. Okay, great. Now you've frozen on me. That's no good.
Oh, have I? I'm still
No,
here.
back again. No,
Okay,
back
good.
again. You're back again. You just suddenly had you there for 2 or 3 seconds with your eyes shut, looking at the camera. I thought, oh God.
Here we go.
Here we go. Here we go. Right. Well, I shall kick off then. Just start, and I'll just run through those sort of questions. And if there's something that sort of tickles me, or you want to, you think we could expand on, then let's shout. And as I say, this is going to major contractors and main contractors, so it's really sort of the opportunity to tell us what you do, tell us the areas of conflict and what's happening.
Great.
Happy?
Great.
You see how it goes then. Great. Well, Georgia, very good to meet you today, and thank you very much for agreeing to do an interview. Perhaps we ought to start off with you introducing yourself and telling us sort of what your role is in construction sustainability and where you get to in your job.
Thank you. Well, it's really nice to talk to you. Thank you for inviting me to speak. So my name's Georgia Elliot-Smith. I am a sustainability professional. I'm a strategic sustainability advisor in the construction and property industry. And I started my career over 25 years ago now, in the mid-90s, as the first dedicated environment manager in the construction industry in the UK. So I was a teenager and I started working for Bovis Construction in the way back in the dark ages. And I've now been in industry for many years. I'm a chartered environmentalist. I'm an environmental engineer by background. And I started out, as I say, working construction, and I've worked through the last 25 or so years. And now I'm a sustainability professional, advising mainly developers, asset managers, investors, and working on construction projects and development portfolios, advising on sustainability strategy and how we can build better.
Brilliant.
In a nutshell.
That's very good. And so sustainability strategies, just tell me what that actually involves, and that's how you measure that to see success.
Yeah.
So we hear a lot of greenwashing, and that's something which I know that we're all very keen to avoid.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, greenwash is everywhere, and it's absolutely understandable that greenwash is everywhere, because I feel deeply for companies who are being asked to prove that they are behaving sustainably and that they are protecting the climate and ecology and so on, whilst all of that is voluntary. There's no mandatory requirements, or very few mandatory requirements, to go above and beyond business as usual. So naturally greenwash occurs where people say that they're doing more than they really are. So this is where I come in, is to develop a plan usually with the client, to develop a sustainability plan for a development, or maybe a plan across a whole portfolio that they want to make more sustainable in various different ways. And what I will do is look at the unique aspects of a particular site or a property, determine what reasonable best practice looks like. So, what is the output carbon emissions or energy consumption that we should be targeting for this particular refurbishment or retrofit? What is the performance that we should expect from a property in this particular area, in this sector of the industry, and put some really clear performance targets in place for that unique development or that set of properties, so that we can work towards achieving net zero alignment with these properties. And there's some terms here that are very important for me to educate the teams that I work with on, because we all band around words like net zero and biodiversity and things, but really a large part of my work at the beginning of jobs is to try and get everybody on the same page about what the heck we're talking about when we say these things and what that means in practice. So making sure that all of the developments are working towards achieving net zero alignment, making sure that we are working towards achieving outstanding biodiversity performance, making sure that if this property is in a site perhaps of high water stress, which is something we don't really talk about a great deal, that we're making sure we're future-proofing that building and we're making it net water zero or net water positive. And yeah, generally taking a look at that specific circumstance, that client, what's going on in that region and in that sector of the industry, and then set some really clear targets, and then upskill the team to be able to deliver that, and then monitor it and report on it as we go through, and then hold the hands of the team as they're developing their plans and as they're rolling it all out and construction's underway, to make sure they can actually achieve those targets, because we don't want this to be punitive. This needs to be something that we're all collaborating on, we're all learning about at the same time. This is new territory for so many people, and although companies have said for many years that they're leaders in sustainability, when you actually get on site, it's very much the same old priorities as they have been in place for certainly the 25, 30 years of my career, and I see that, I understand it, I get why it is the way it is, but we have to start changing that. And so that's what my role is to really practically support that transition.
Brilliant, brilliant. So Georgia, one of the challenges we get in that role is trying to create aspirational targets or realistic targets. And depending on your experience in the industry, you might think realistic is not that far away, whereas aspirational to get to the net zero strategy you're talking about can be quite a challenge.
Yeah.
So how do you sort of balance those two competing arguments? Because there's if you get to getting all the way to net zero, there's generally some very large pound signs which can affect that investment.
Absolutely. Well, generally you don't do it in one go. This is a strategy that you're implementing over a number of years. And so what we do, and this is always something that's best to do at a portfolio level with a client rather than on an individual development, because usually by the time you get to appointing a design team and, starting to then think about appointing a contractor, the ship has sailed in terms of strategically what you're doing with that building. So I ideally love to work with my clients at a pre-building acquisition point, where we can actually look at the building that they're considering buying and we'll map out where the carbon emissions, for example, of this building in operation sit. Are they miles off a net zero trajectory? And if it is, then we need to factor in, well, what will be the cost to bring this building into net zero? That's if we're doing a refurbishment, which is quite a common area of work that I do, because we've got this legacy, massive legacy of building stock, and we've got to do something with it, and we're never going to meet our net zero targets if we knock everything down and build from scratch. So refurbishment is a massive part of my work. New build is much more straightforward, and actually achieving net zero in new build construction is very straightforward and should just be a minimum requirement, of any client specification. So it's the refurbishment is kind of where the gremlins lie, but it's also very, very exciting. And I think what's most exciting for me is when we do the proper data work and we examine the current performance of this building, we look at what's possible, and then we map out with the client, okay, how are we going to achieve net zero over the next 5 to 10 years, not just in this one project. And we'll try and get as close as we can. But of course, there are compromises. Of course, there are things that we can't, nobody's got bottomless, pockets to chuck money at every single property in their portfolio. But how are we, so we identify across portfolios the buildings that are the most off track, and then we start to create a pathway of how we're going to get those on track. But for individual properties, it starts by doing the data. And this is so new for design teams, to actually look at the performance of an existing building rather than just walking in, having a look around and then throwing a design at it, to go back to the bills. I mean, and I'm trying to change industry by saying to agents, just going to the commercial agents and saying, when you are putting together the pack for a building, the sale pack, you must include the meter readings for that building so that we are able, when we're looking at purchasing this building, we're able to see the energy performance in practice of this building, because we all know the EPC is meaningless. So there's some really fundamental changes that we need to make in this sector. And I'm trying with my clients to educate, to bring people along and to do that background work, so we really know what we're working with in a property, rather than just walking into something and treating it as we would have done 20 or 30 years ago, not how we should be treating it in a climate and ecological emergency.
It's really good to hear, George, what the sort of work you're doing, because the European Union published a report probably 2020 saying that less than 10% of the commercial buildings in the UK would be worth more than the retrofit costs by 2030 to meet net zero targets required at 2030.
Wow.
It's a staggering percentage, and it's really great to hear you're working to make these buildings and retrofitting these buildings to bring them back into value. They become stranded assets at that stage.
And this is it. We are stranded assets everywhere. And it's really interesting. I was having a conversation with somebody last night saying, there's a bubble here. There's a bubble here where, yes, of course, it's buyer beware, but all the smart building owners who are doing work with people like me to look at which of our buildings are stranded, and then offloading them. There are people buying these buildings, who are not aware of the sort of work that I do, saying, actually, these buildings are not worth a great deal as we're moving forwards, and carbon is going to become regulated. We are going to start paying carbon taxes. There's one direction of travel, and you need to be smart about how you're looking at these assets in a way that we never have done before.
Well, so that brings you on to the next question. Given most of the people listening are going to be contractors or subcontractors within the market, what do you think the regulation we are going to be facing in this decade is likely to look like? And how's that going to change what we do?
I think, as I mentioned, there is one direction of travel here. It is absolutely clear, and we look at Europe, we look around the world. We are, however you feel about it, we are in a climate crisis, and we are, the dream of keeping 1.5 alive. So the idea that we can keep global warming below 1.5 degrees is now, it's controversial, but in my opinion, that ship has now sailed, and we're on track now for almost 3 degrees of global warming. Now, that is an incontrovertible fact, and so global, whether we're, politics has become very divisive, and there's all kinds of different messaging around the climate crisis. However, we are all signed up to Paris Agreement. We have got to act. In the UK, we have legally binding net zero targets. And, we can see with this new government that they are very keen to start putting ambitious regulation into practice. And so, although in the past we've seen a lot of lobbying to delay and derail ambitious nature-focused and climate-focused policy, that is going to move. It has to move. And I think that's a really good thing, actually. I think this is something, we'll probably come on to it later, but I think this is something that the construction industry should be really embracing and grabbing with both hands, because when we grasp these issues and when we turn them into a business opportunity, this is exportable skills. We are in a global economy where everybody has to deal with these issues. And so if we're grappling this and really working out how to make good business out of clean building, ambitious building that meets climate and biodiversity targets, that is something that we can smash out of the park and should be super excited about. So I think when you talk about regulation coming forwards, generally speaking, we are going to see more protection of nature. We're going to see more, we're already seeing an awful lot of reporting going on. So lots of corporates are having to report on the activity that they're undertaking to align with net zero targets. They're having to report carbon emissions. They're having to report on nature impact. So there are a couple of things, the TNFD and the TCFD. When you work in sustainability, there are all manner of different reports and acronyms and initiatives. There's millions of them. I won't go into all of them because I'll send all your listeners to sleep. But I think it is just really important to say that this is not a passing fad. And I've been saying that for 25 years, and I'm right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, finally, it's my time in the sun.
Yep.
It's moving fast. These decisions are moving quickly. This afternoon, I'm leading a webinar with Baroness Rosie Boycott and somebody from Balfour Beatty and somebody from SOCEMV to talk about ecocide law. Now, this is something really interesting, and it's happened very, very quickly. Internationally, and in the EU, for example, the Environmental Crimes Directive came out a couple of weeks ago. That now makes ecocide a criminal offence. So company directors who knowingly allow significant harm to the environment can be criminally prosecuted now. If they knew that their decision was going to result in significant harm, that's a criminal offence. And these sorts of things, they're coming thick and fast. And so, the smart company is keeping on top of this and horizon scanning to see not just how might we be punished, but how can we profit from this? How can we make this a USP? How can we really get ahead of it and really develop these great skills that also young people and generally even us oldies, in industry get kind of excited about, because it's good stuff. It makes you feel good about the work you do if it's done in the right way, and it's not just something that is like, oh, here you go, you've got your day job to do, and on top of that you've got all of this really boring sustainability stuff to do. And I think that's something we need to tackle in construction, is the way we tell the story about sustainability and the way it makes people feel, and the fact that it should be really exciting and purpose driven and make you feel good about life rather than just being a chore and something dull.
Yeah, no, absolutely. One of the challenges you talked through there, Georgia, was the challenge of training and educating and understanding the market.
Yeah.
As you say, there's a plethora of 3-letter acronyms, 4-letter acronyms that we have to understand, and we have a challenge of just scaring people off and saying it's too difficult and I need to employ somebody like you to do it. When actually we need to bring that knowledge and that expertise and that realization of opportunity back to the boardroom and into the employment base of most of these companies. How do we go about that? How should a company look at understanding the market we're now working in and the direction of travel you're talking about?
Yeah, there's absolute beauty and elegance in simplicity, I think, is the thing. And I think that where the challenge is for most organizations is you have to go through the complex work. You can't go straight to simplicity. There has to be a level at which somebody who's expert in the topic is scanning through all the complex regulation, best practice, all of the technical data and so on, and coming up with a very, very clear plan about how you proceed. And what you leave out, what you deprioritize, is as important as what you prioritize. And I think what we've struggled with in the past in sustainability is trying to do everything. And you can't do everything. You have to prioritize. So I think that's a very legitimate way to proceed, is to just choose 3 things that you are going to focus on, you're going to absolutely get a grip on, and you're going to make that a core part of your business, and a core part, so that everybody understands what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how their particular job helps you move closer to that particular target. And there's very famous stories, like, the guy sweeping the floor at NASA, somebody asked him, what's the purpose of your job? And he's like, well, I'm helping put a man in space. It's those sorts of things, isn't it? It's like, if we can link what people are doing in their job with the idea that they're building a better world, they're tackling air pollution, they're preventing kids getting asthma, they're reducing the climate crisis so floods and overheating isn't going to happen, or that's a beautiful world that we're trying to create. It's something really positive. And I think we've struggled in the past in sustainability about making it far too complicated and technical, bombarding people with information so that in the end they just go, oh my God, I'm just overwhelmed. I've got a job to do over here. I can't also keep this stuff in my brain as well. And I think as well, although there are clearly some pressing urgency issues like climate and carbon emissions, they have to be dealt with by companies. There's no question. You just have to deal with that. There are other things that I think we fail to engage people on the things that really matter to them, like family and their community and the things that people really, really care about. If we can link what they're doing with genuinely what they care about, they're far more likely to want to do that work and also to feel really good about it and then come home from work feeling like they've actually achieved something positive. So I'm very much a champion of purpose-driven roles. And part of the work I do with companies, so I don't just work on construction projects and property portfolios. I also work with organizations to create sustainability strategies for companies. And very much this is about, what is this company's unique set of priorities? What really matters to you and what can you get behind and drive? Even if somebody told you didn't need to, you would do it anyway because you just love it. What I try to do is make sure that everybody in the company understands fundamentally the purpose behind their role. So if you work in accounts, it's not just about processing bills and invoices and things. It's about tackling poverty, and it's about maintaining economic stability and keeping people in work. Because, when companies don't pay their bills, other companies go bust. And there's a mental health crisis. There's so many crises going on that really helping people to understand the significant role they play in maintaining people's livelihoods, in maintaining stability in industry, of maintaining healthy families, who are ripped apart by economic instability. That sort of stuff can really change the way that people feel about the work that they do. And I don't think we talk enough about that stuff.
No. So I mean, you talk about value-based organisations, and we see the rise of B Corps within the economy as a whole. There's one or two in construction. Do you think there's a role for more B Corps within the sector? Is that going to help drive sustainability and address some of the issues you're talking about there?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I feel quite conflicted about B Corp. And don't get me wrong, I have supported companies to become B Corps. My previous company was a B Corp. That was something that I drove because I really wanted to give it a go and get stuck in and see what this meant. And because I am a purpose-driven person, and so any business that I lead, I want to be purpose-driven and for everybody to feel that way. What I'm seeing though is, you've got to go into it with heart as well as a kind of cynical business mind. I mean, there's these two things have to sit together. You can't be all heart. You've got to be, smart business person as well. But you can't also just be, cynical business. This will be really good for our marketing profile. There's got to be something in it where people are craving doing business differently. But unfortunately, what I'm seeing in lots of new B Corps is that this is just a buzzword. This is like the way they've always treated sustainability is, oh, great, that's a new shiny badge. We'll grab that and then we can carry on doing what we're doing, business as usual. But look, we've got this shiny badge that we can stick in front of clients and everyone will be super impressed. And then we can just carry on doing what we always did. And that's not the intention of B Corp. The intention of it is to truly support a transition to a new way of working. But I don't think that many people going into that. No, that's wrong, actually. I think a lot of people going into it are craving something different. And so that's why they're going into B Corp. Yeah. I think some people are still treating it like they treat other certifications, where this badge means we're sustainable. We don't actually have to really do anything about it. We just have to get this badge. And I think, that will play out in time, because as with these things, there's, well, good luck to them. Good luck to them. But I think that as time goes on, it will become clear who the real leaders are in this. And I also think that there's a massive role for regulation, which is why I'm a legal activist and I do a lot of lobbying myself, because fundamentally this stuff shouldn't be voluntary. We should, government should be leading the way. We should be told exactly what performance is expected. And everybody just has to conform, because that's just the way it is. And so these voluntary certifications ultimately should be redundant, because the regulations should be pushing us in the right direction.
Well, we might come back to it. Can I just come back to the training and education? Because, as you know, most of our sector is SMEs, and
Yeah.
over 90% of our businesses are SMEs in the sector.
Yeah.
Real challenge to do, as you're sort of talking there, really get under the bonnet about sustainability.
Yeah.
But I quite like your idea of saying just pick 3 items that you think are worthwhile and focus on those, because that's actually, I think, probably the capacity of most of our businesses is just to focus on those 3 items. I
Yeah.
think do we need to start looking at how we get that sort of environment or that expectation in down the supply chains to make that happen? Because,
Yeah.
as you know, construction's got some very long supply chains, and if you're
Yes.
producing widgets at the bottom of the supply chain, by the time you get to the top of the supply chain, you're just going to be assessed on cost, and that's
Mm-hmm.
that's the challenge.
Yeah.
So trying to understand how we inform the directors within that supply chain to look at those things without asking them to spend a lot of money on research and experts like you to come and tell them what they ought to be doing. Is there anything we ought to be doing within those supply chains, or clients ought to be pushing down the supply chains to get that, or set those expectations, if nothing else?
100%. 100%. I think it's absolutely scandalous that small businesses are just left clueless about what on earth to do with it. I mean, it's difficult enough running a small business, I know, to then have all of these things put on top of you when you're just trying to financially survive is, with no guidance, and you're not an expert in these things, for me, this has been my 25-year career. So I totally feel for people in small businesses. And I think we have, as an industry, we have been negligent in supporting those small businesses, which make up the vast, vast majority of economic activity within the construction industry. We have been negligent in, as I would say, leaders in the industry, professional institutions, trade associations, major employers, major contractors, I think, have not done enough to support the supply chains in understanding and implementing these really crucial things for the future. So, all of our supply chain partners should be aware of what needs to be done in really simple language. They should be provided with tools, with templates, with training, helping them to identify things that are material to their business. So, as I say, carbon is super important for everybody, and for major contractors, major employers, there are these regulations which have been coming through over the last few years that mandate that they're looking at their scope 1, 2, 3 emissions, starting to use technical terms there, but generally looking at their carbon emissions, reporting them, measuring them, and working on reducing them. You can't do that without engaging your supply chain seriously. And I think there's been a lot of lip service around, major employers or major contractors, or even trade associations talking about sustainability. But I still think that most small businesses are floundering, and they're failing also to see the relevance to them. I think it may now be starting to change, in that I think large contracting organizations are starting to say, well, it's mandatory that you have to produce carbon data and you've got to supply this in order to be on our preferred supplier list. But again, I think there's a tradition within construction supply chains that this is quite punitive rather than being supportive, that you have to come up with this carbon data. And of course, if I'm a small contracting supply firm, I don't know the difference between scope 1, 2, and 3. I don't know how to measure that. This is like somebody's full-time job. How on earth am I going to do that? And I just think that there needs to be more work, more joined up effort as well, because we still treat sustainability as a business advantage, as like a competitive edge. So I think, and I know that traditionally construction is very like that, very competitive, very tight margins, where we struggle with the collaboration. I think we struggle with coming together to really collaborate, because our supply chain partners are all the same. They'll be working for several different major contractors, for several different types of developers and, public bodies. So I definitely think we could do more on being super supportive, simplifying the message, making it absolutely crystal clear and super simple, and providing workable tools. Although I do think, there are bodies like the Sustainability Supply Chain School, who have been doing some amazing work with contractors. I'm not sure how many people are actually using that. I think that could be much more widespread. And I think, people in lots and lots of different types of projects could be sharing that information. Even if you're not a member, you can still go on there and obtain free sustainability training. But even going on to that can be quite overwhelming because there's a lot of stuff on there. So simplicity is the key.
Great. So, George, tell us which campaigns you're on at the moment. Which bits of regulation you're pushing us to be mandatory within the industry at the moment? What's top of the list?
Okay, gosh. Well, I never stop, so I've got quite a few things going on. So as fighting dirty is kind of my hobby, I would say. It's my so I take the government to court Georgia, for fun. It's like part of my so my day job is, sustainability and ESG and the built environment. My sort of Batman stuff is fighting dirty. So what I do is I work with legal teams, I work with experts in different industry sectors, and we identify loopholes in government policy or legislation, or we identify inconsistencies in regulation that mean that pollution can occur. So we all know these things exist, where chemicals are not properly regulated, with the planning processes are terrible, carbon issues, there's all sorts of stuff going on which really should be tackled. So we use the law to do that. We use judicial reviews. We've got quite a few things going on at the moment, quite a lot going on in waste in the background. I can't talk too much about it in detail, but we're focusing on waste. We're doing a lot of work on chemicals as well. And I think this is a big thing in construction that we don't really talk about, is actually there's a huge amount of chemicals that are in our products, that we're putting into the environments that we create, that we're putting into the natural environment. And that is something that we shouldn't have to deal with. We're in the construction, we're not chemicals experts. Maybe some people are, but I certainly am not. Regulation should just be right, so that we're not exposing our workers and the communities that we work with and the natural world. We're not exposing them to hazardous chemicals. But unfortunately, at the moment, we are. I mean, flame retardants is a massive one. And obviously, off the back of Grenfell, there's a huge amount of attention on fire. But we are pumping our buildings full of really toxic chemicals, which create massive harm to people and planet. So that's something that we're focusing on at the moment, just to make sure that that regulation is right. I'm also looking at, funny enough, last night I was speaking at an event for the UK Green Building Council, and we were talking there about several things that are inconsistent in government policy around fossil fuel use, and how to electrify buildings, the fact that the grid capacity isn't there for electricity right now. How are we going to push that forwards? The fact that there are tax breaks on using fossil fuels rather than using electricity is something which I know is close to your heart. Yeah. And many other things. And so I cast quite a wide net, and I'm always looking for the thing where I can cause a bit of trouble and stir things up and create maybe some strategic difference. But a big one for me is decarbonising the existing building stock. It's a massive one for me. My brain at the moment is whirring about how can we create an economic environment whereby it's financially favourable to decarbonise your buildings, because at the moment we work in an industry where decarbonisation has no economic value. So there's a cost to decarbonising your building, but you're not realising any return on investment that's significant. And so those two things have to link up if we're going to take industry with us. We can't expect people to keep cutting their own throats in order to voluntarily do the right thing, because that's where greenwash comes from.
It is, but presumably one of the answers there is to account for the carbon and then tax it accordingly, and that actually will give us all a level playing field across everything. So we'd solve all sorts of traditional problems in construction, like steel versus concrete. We'd actually have a baseline to work for on carbon, your building owners would have a chance of understanding then what the cost of managing and operating those buildings were, and carbon tax going forward, it would be accounted for.
For many years I've been campaigning for a carbon tax because, and this was part of the legal action that I took against government, was the fact that major polluters, so back in 2021 I took the government to court over the UK emissions trading scheme. It's all very geeky, but the nub of that was the fact that polluters don't pay. Polluters profit, because the pollution that they put into the atmosphere is it's a global commons. Nobody owns the atmosphere and therefore everyone owns it, and we just pour our stuff into it, and it's outside of the economic model. Once you start taxing carbon, it suddenly becomes a reality and it becomes a commodity in the market, and people want to protect that and protect their bottom line. And so it makes absolute sense. And even very, massive businesses are advocating for carbon tax quietly advocating for it. So I spoke to one of the former chief executives of a major FTSE company, and he said to me that he campaigns behind closed doors for carbon taxation, because the problem is that for him, as a CEO of a major FTSE 100 company, if he implements any kind of practice which reduces their profit, first of all, he's in violation of his fiduciary duty to the company, because his duty as CEO is to maintain the profitability of the company. So by voluntarily reducing their profit, he is violating his director duties, number one. And then number two is that those shareholders will just immediately boot him off the board. He'll lose his job instantly. So he can't decarbonize the business because there's no fiscal requirement for him to do that. So as we as campaigners are banging on their doors and raiding their AGMs, to say, you're really bad for the environment, you should cut single-use plastic and you should stop using fossil fuels. The guy's going, yeah, I agree personally, but in my job I can't do anything about it unless there's a carbon tax. And as soon as we tax carbon, that becomes part of the business model. I can keep my job, I can invest in all of this transition that needs to take place. And so I would love to see the construction industry getting hold of that narrative and really understanding that positive lobbying to drive ambition, to really get this stuff moving, is the way forwards. But we're unfortunately in a position at the moment where 89% of corporate lobbying is aimed at delaying or blocking climate and ecological positive regulation. 89% is there to block it. We've got to switch that around. We've got to show that this industry wants change. We're ready for it. We've got the technical solutions. We've got the ambition. What we need is the right level playing field that enables us to raise investment, to scale up innovation, and to become an industry that's world beating, where we're doing this amazing stuff and we can export that then to other territories and show them how it's done.
Yeah, brilliant. Georgia, it's been quite a great exploration of a very wide set of topics. Just as a sort of last question, if you're somewhere within the supply chain within construction, what would be the one or two things that you think you would focus on now? Is it education? Is it measurement? Is it lobbying? Is it, where do you think the focus of the vast majority of our industry ought to be placed at the moment?
I think there's a massive problem with the cultural narrative that we've created around sustainability. And I think that's a fundamental blocker. There's been a lot of gaslighting going on in the media by politicians, by major industries, that if you care about the climate, you're some sort of hippie that's out of touch with business reality. I mean, that simply isn't true. We have to start changing the narrative around this. And I think that it's about competitive advantage, in other countries, exportable skills, incredible skills for the future. Kids are dying to get into construction because such exciting stuff is happening to tackle, climate issues, which so many young people care about deeply. I think we need to look at this through a really pragmatic lens and think about how can we turn this from a burden and from something we should be stopping that is a threat to business as usual into seeing it as something really exciting and positive. And in order to do that, we have to support people to do it easily. So I think there's two things there. The cultural narrative, the stories that we tell people and the way that we present sustainability has got to change. It's got to change. We've got to see brave voices talking about ambition, talking about the positive things, the positive legacy and the positive impact that we're going to have. And I think as well, making it really, really easy for people. So engaging with the supply chain in a way, and for some people, they don't even necessarily need to be trained in why they're doing this. It just needs to be really, really easy. It just needs to be so simple that it's as straightforward as just clicking a button and the work is done, and some people will want to learn about it and that those resources need to be available to them, but other people just need the tools and they need to be able to get on with it really quickly. So I think there's a dual thing there. Make it easy for people, make people excited about the opportunities. And I think those two things could be really transformative.
Well, it's a great note to finish on, because that's a role that the National Federation of Builders ought to be doing as one of the leading trade bodies in the sector, is creating that excitement and changing that culture.
Right.
Georgia, thank you very much indeed for what's been a fascinating introduction to a lot of sustainability issues, and great to hear your campaigning and fighting on so many fronts to bring these to reality. Thank you very much. Been great to
Thank
great to
you.
speak to you.
Thank you.
I'm going to stop there, and if I can just stop the recording. Transcribe. Come on, stop. Will allow me to stop recording. There we go. Brilliant.